Welcome back. Many of you tell us all the time that President Trump is only saying what we're thinking. During an Oval Office meeting on immigration reform, the president, witnesses say, referred to Haiti and Central American and African nations as SH whole countries. No, we have made the decision that the president's language is not appropriate for prime time. More importantly, the president isn't saying what all Republicans and certainly all Democrats are actually thinking. And joining us for more are two former members of Congress from Florida challenging the conventional thinking about party politics. Former Republican Congressman David Jolly from Pinellas County and former Democratic Congressman Patrick Murphy, who you will remember challenged Senator Marco Rubio in 2016. Gentlemen, welcome to the Trapezoid. And I want to talk about how you both are going around the state talking about the lost art of bipartisanship. But first, we got to get through what's been going on for the last 24 hours and President Trump's comments, which have really gotten a lot of condemnation from a lot of folks, both Republicans and Democrats. On the other hand, I can't tell you how many times that we look at viewer comments around here and they express a certain kind of sentiment that you sometimes hear on Fox News. And why don't we take a look at this?
If it's true, this is how the forgotten men and women in America talk at the bar. This is how Trump relates to people. If you're at a bar and you're in Wisconsin and you're thinking they're bringing in a bunch of Haiti people or El Salvadorians or people from Niger, this is how some people talk. Is it graceful? No. Is it polite or delicate? Absolutely not. Is it a little offensive? Of course it is.
So I want you both to talk for a moment to those people like that who live on the Suncoast here, who really do not have an objection to what the president had to say and how he said it. David?
So this is not how everybody talks. This may be how some speak. And while the sentiment over border security, I think, is universal, so are certain humanitarian feelings that we should all have. And the president's duty is to speak to those better angels, and he's failed to do so. You know, a lot of people are asking whether or not he is racist or not, and I don't think we even need to have that conversation, whatever your opinion is. What we know is that he continues to speak to a social construct that recognizes white people of European descent, perhaps wealthier than poor people of color, and that they have different places in society. And that's not the words a president should be using. I spoke earlier about the fact that George Bush 43, our last Republican president, challenged the notion of the soft bigotry of low expectations. The president continues today to speak to the hard bigotry of no expectations, that somehow people from Africa or Haiti have a different lot in life, and it's not our responsibility to welcome them with open arms. We can be a nation of secure borders, but also one of open hearts.
Patrick, do you think that there's a different calculation with the president right now, and that is electoral politics? He has approval ratings in the mid to low 30s at this point. He needs to hold on to his base, and this is how he believes to do it.
This comment coming on the heels of Fire and Fury on the book, I think this is who he is. I don't think he thinks through these comments, thinks through these racist remarks and some big master plan. Oh, I'm going to get the base if I say this. I'm going to distract by doing this. Is who this guy is, right? And you know it's bad when on the nightly news you have to tell your kids to leave the room because the president's speaking. We're going to tell you what he said. That's bad. Because historically, the President of the United States is supposed to speak on behalf of the country, right? It's supposed to represent us. But what is he doing? In fact, I'd say he's representing the worst parts of our country right now, reaching a new low.
So given that, how do we get past this politicization, polarization of everything these days? Because it seems more and more the people who support the president and the people who are Democrats and independents and Republicans who do not support how he approaches these issues, it seems like the gap is so wide.
So, very importantly, and to those who agree with the president and say we feel this way, the president is speaking to a legitimate fear and anxiety we often feel, an economic insecurity, that somehow our lot in life is not the same as generations before. But the president is focusing his attention on an adversary that's one of fiction. And that's where he is misleading us for partisan politics. What Patrick and I have tried to do, particularly in the purple state of Florida, is to recognize that we are a very diverse nation, politically, socially, culturally, economically, but that we all have some very similar priorities and interest in how we improve our lot in life for generations to come, 90% of the issues Republicans and Democrats wrestle with, we actually agree on. We let the 10% divide us. While this president is exploiting that 10%, Patrick and I try to speak to the 90%.
The obvious question is, how is that going? What kind of reception have you gotten as you have gone around the state doing these lectures and these appearances at a time when it seems that we could not be farther apart?
So far, it's been great. I mean, maybe people are saying bad things behind our back, but it hasn't gotten to us yet.
You should be able to see that in a few minutes.
It's been nothing but, positive feedback. And we started this, very organically. I mean, obviously, other sides of the aisle, of course, we agreed on probably more than we disagreed on, quite frankly, to David's earlier point there, and have always tried to find the middle ground and care about governing, getting things done. And since we're not in office, we said, you know what, why in the world aren't we at least educating people to understand we can change what's happening right now, right? The amount of people that are upset by what's happening in our democracy with Donald Trump. But you got to get involved. And we're trying to point out some of the problems that are there and putting the power, right back to the people. If you want to get involved, we can change this.
Okay. We are just getting warmed up, and we'll have much more on the week in politics right after we check the First Alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. Are you tired of practically nothing getting done in Congress? Our political process is so polarized it has become paralyzed. And joining us for more are two former Florida members of Congress challenging the conventional thinking about party politics. Former Republican Congressman David Jolly from Pinellas County and former Democratic Congressman Patrick Murphy, who you will remember challenged Senator Marco Rubio in 2016. I want to finish up our conversation about the president because it's almost a Rorschach test in terms of these comments today and what you think of the president. And obviously this morning, in terms of celebrating Martin Luther King Day, the president was confronted with the obvious question in the Oval Office.
Mr. President, are you a racist? Mr. President, will you respond to these serious questions about your statement, sir?
No, Mr. President, answer the
I'm
line.
talking to the president, not you, sir. Mr. President, are you a racist?
I don't know if a question like that has ever been asked in the Oval Office. And again, the people watching this right now, you have so divergent views on what you saw there.
So look, it's a hard national moment that those questions are being asked in the White House. Now, I would say April Ryan might be taking a little bit of liberty in shouting those questions, but she's doing so because we're living through an administration who refuses to provide clarity around some of their very basic principles of governing and their very basic principles of policy. We were talking earlier about the fact that the president earlier this week seemed to embrace DACA, the idea of giving some type of pathway to dreamers. That's a net good. That's a positive, right? We want to hear Republicans speak to that in addition to just border security. So you have to give him credit for it, but then he undermines himself the next day.
Right, and that's what I wanted to get to is when you looked at that conversation and you looked at very reasonable questions and answers, Patrick, how does somebody who is conditioned to be so opposed to the president and everything he does and says step back and say, you know what, he did pretty good there?
It's funny you asked that because I was actually talking to David about this earlier. I was in the car coincidentally when this meeting was going on about DACA. In the first 10 minutes, I'm saying to myself, wow, he's actually kind of sounds like a leader. He's asking for advice. He's listening to Democrats, listening to Republicans, saying there's going to be a deal. Senator Feinstein speaks up. So, Mr. President, will you be okay with this DACA deal? Let's get that done, then move on to comprehensive reform. Of course, let's do that. We'll do that, then we'll move on to the other stuff. I'm in the car alone, but saying, holy cow, did this just happen? And then, of course, McCarthy corrected him, saying, no, Mr. President, that's not your position. Your position is we're going to build a wall. We're going to do more border security. And then, of course, we know what happened from there. So, this is a president that I think went in that 10-minute period or whatever it was, 20 minutes, to actually contradicting Fire and Fury, the book, to then buying right into it for someone that doesn't know the policies and where he even stands.
This is something I often refer to as the tragedy of Donald Trump, if you will. Both parties are always pulled to their extremes, right? And in the Republican Party, you saw the Tea Party emerge in 2010. Principles, many of which I agree with. But as a Republican who thinks we need to speak to a more diverse set of constituencies, I was looking for somebody like a Donald Trump to bring the party back from the Tea Party. Donald Trump is someone of little ideological conviction, a deal maker. He was a Democrat, then a Republican. He is somebody who could have had that meeting the other day and said, let's get a deal on immigration, let's get a deal on infrastructure. Instead, he spent the last 2 years catering to these very dark instincts within the party and the country, and it's undermined his credibility to actually have moments like we saw when it comes to DACA.
The question is, how do you get through to people in general? Because, you know, for the last year, you've been out there as a anti-Trumper. Patrick, I mean, everybody who's watching this right now, you can imagine the comments out there. There are 2 liberals, or maybe 3 liberals on the trapezoid right now.
I'm not, by the way.
I know that,
in there.
but you know what people are saying out there, and so, like many of us, nothing is black and white. People who may have conservative views on a lot of different issues may be moderate, or at least what used to be considered moderate. So, how do you make that case to Floridians who have basically retired to their corners?
Well, actually, this speaks to a lot of what David and I talk about in our town halls, is why is our country becoming so rigid, right? What is driving this polarization in our country? After serving, together in the Congress, we've seen it firsthand. Starting off, number one, with the gerrymandering in our country, right? About 90% of congressional districts are predetermined. We already know where they're going to be. The money, right? Billions and billions of dollars. Then you have the media, not you, I'm not pointing to you singularly, but you look at the Fox Newses versus the MSNBCs, where more and more people are starting to get their news, don't even tell the same story, and if they do, they're completely different versions of it. Or when people go to social media or a website, they go to websites that confirm their current beliefs. So they're seeing it, and they're seeing it becoming more and more rigid. And then you add in the lack of friendships, the lack of relationships in D.C., the constant influx of cameras and no ability to actually get to know each other.
Let me ask you about that, because that has often been talked about, and there is an old story. In fact, this is coming up again, the issue of earmarks.
Yep.
And that earmarks used to force Republicans and Democrats to talk to each other. And that, David, you give me that bridge that I want, I will give you something else. And the elimination of that basically retired both sides to their corners there. They're talking about bringing back earmarks. Would you be supportive of that?
I always have been, because the framers of the Constitution were. It's an Article I responsibility of the Congress to determine spending, not the president. And so however money is spent, and importantly, earmarks don't add to the deficit and so forth. Here's the earmark debate. And the fundamental issue with earmarks is trust, and it's who do you trust? And the fact is, very few people trust Congress, and as a result, they don't trust their spending. So during the Obama administration, we saw the Obama administration get to determine how money was spent, not Congress. Now Trump is in office, and Republicans are saying, well, we want to get to determine how to spend money. So Trump's suggesting to bring back earmarks. It is constitutionally the prerogative of Congress. Does it need safeguards? Of course. Democrats, I give them credit for the reforms they brought in around 2006, 2007 in terms of accountability. There's a way to do it in sunlight that makes sense.
Patrick, when you were there, and obviously that the both of you have struck up a friendship, I don't know if it started while you were both still in Congress, but were you able to make personal relationships with Republican members of Congress that resulted in you being able to work with them better?
No doubt about it, but too far and few between. I always equate starting Congress to starting college. You get elected, you go on these retreats, and you're supposed to get to know each other, your freshman class, and then you have a committee, which is like being in a math class with somebody in college, and the people that you're around, you get to know a little bit better. I was in a position to be able to start a bipartisan freshman group to try to talk about getting our spending in control. Because of that group, I made some relationships, but as time went on, I looked back at Congress, and of the 4 years I was there, I spent one weekend in D.C., and that was because the government had shut down. I was basically forced to be there. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have spent one weekend there. And now you can make an argument, I want my member of Congress home every weekend, and that, I understand that. However, when members of Congress show up to vote on a Monday at, say, 4 or 5 o'clock, they race to votes, they're fundraising Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they get on a plane after votes and they race home. It's a race to the airport on Thursday. Everyone is so busy doing other things that have very little to do with actually legislation or getting to know an issue, they don't get to know each other.
Right, and they used to talk about the fact that in the old days, their kids would go to the same school, and you would,
that stuff
you would
matters.
meet those folks in situations other than just work. But I want to get to one other issue, which is infrastructure, which is something that in theory both Republicans and Democrats both agree on. President Trump wants to push it along, but it becomes, does it not, David, a zero-sum game that if you win, I lose, and therefore something like that won't happen.
To to Patrick's point, we both pursued bipartisanship, but ultimately leadership kills it. There's no political value to bipartisanship because of the money, the gerrymandering, and the closed primary system. Here's the problem on infrastructure. It will require Republicans once and for all, if they haven't already done it, to completely abandon fiscal responsibility. They've already spent the money they needed for infrastructure on corporate tax cuts. So if they're going to do infrastructure, infrastructure is going to get done through more deficit spending. That's the reality of it.
All right, somebody's getting a phone call, so we'll just take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. So, David, I'll start with you. Given how polarized we are right now, given what's happening in Washington with the Russia investigation, which, Democrats basically pull their hair out at, and folks like yourself, but you asked a lot of people in your party and they don't care.
No, look, they don't, and I don't think a lot of voters, that will be the issue they go into November thinking about. Republicans have an opportunity to say, we voted for lower taxes, Democrats voted for higher taxes. Democrats have to decide what their message is in November. The encouraging thing I do want to say, though, because we talk about gerrymandering, the primary system, campaign finance, we saw in Florida voters change our district lines through fair districts. We've seen states across the country change the primary system and the redistricting system within their states. We can change politics. Progressive, moderate, conservative, doesn't matter what you are. Let's create a government that's more accountable. That's what Patrick and I like to do.
But right now there are I believe the Democrats are contesting 4 congressional districts in Florida, including the one we're sitting in right now. But the rest of the others, 20 some odd districts in Florida are so gerrymandered that there really are no competitive races, Patrick.
And that speaks to the core problem that Dave and I would probably agree. If you had to pick one single problem with the Congress right now, it would probably be gerrymandering. Right? There's so many things you have to do, but I'll just break it down a touch. 90% or so of congressional districts are predetermined. If you're in one of those safe seats, the ones you just mentioned, the only election that matters basically is the primary. In a primary turnout, you have about 15% show up. So 15% of the country determines 90% of your members of Congress.
All right, we have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about last night's show on the possible cancer cluster at Bayshore High School. There have been nearly 500 cases of former Bayshore students and employees contracting cancer, autoimmune diseases, or having children with birth defects and other illnesses. Finally, the State Department of Health is investigating, and here's what some of you are saying. Yuri says this has been going on for so long, and yet just after years and years of deaths, they decide to do something. It's about time. Dana says there's no excuse to not locate each former student. Not sure why it is a problem. Makes no sense. Leslie says, I have submitted my medical records. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation about tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired. Just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank both our guests for being here tonight. Former Republican Congressman David Jolly from Pinellas County and former Democratic Congressman Patrick Murphy.